Welcome to this edition of the SAU Report. I'm Bryan Jones.
And I'm Marquita Newton.
Today we're interviewing Svetlana Paulson. She's the Assistant Professor of History. So, Ms. Paulson, tell us about the circumstances that brought you to SAU.
Well, a couple of years ago, I was looking for a job in history, and I specialize in Russian history. So as I was looking on the internet, I found this fabulous advertisement that immediately caught my eye, and this was the SAU History Department. Not only it wanted somebody who was interested in Russian history, there is also a Russian exchange program at SAU, and I thought that would be a wonderful opportunity. So I applied for this position, I got it, and I never regretted it ever since.
Okay. What other classes besides Russian history do you teach?
I teach European history, mainly the 20th and the 19th century, and also a variety of world civilization courses. And this year I'm also teaching women's history, which is, again, another wonderful opportunity. So I'm hoping that SAU will have many more offerings in women's history sometime.
So I understand you're from Russia.
Yes.
So that you're very qualified to teach Russian history. And these other history classes, I suppose. What are some differences you've noticed since you've come over here between the culture and so forth? Or maybe some of the differences in the school system and so forth?
Well, the school system is really, I think, different in the two countries that we're talking about. Of course, I've been in the United States for almost 15 years, so it's been a while. And in those years, school system in Russia has changed. But if you look from the student's perspective, certainly studying at a Russian university, just the organization of that is different. For example, here you would expect when you take a history class, you would expect maybe 1 or 2 midterms, right, and a final examination, and you expect to write out your answers for the professor. In Russia, you take 3-4 months of history class, and then at the end, there's just one examination. So basically what this means, you study for all of that long time period, and then in one day you have to prove to the professor that you did a really good job, which can be pretty challenging, I think.
But it can.
Yeah, so when Russian students, we have, as I mentioned, we have the Russian exchange program here at SAU, and each semester 2 students come over to SAU from Moscow State Pedagogical University. So they find the exam system here is challenging because they're not used to writing anything. Yeah. Exams in Russia are also oral exams. You sit down at the table with a professor, and your professor can ask you anything they want. So they're learning how to write those answers and be very efficient about it.
You said you taught women's history. What is that all about? I never knew there was a women's history.
Yeah, this is also something interesting and new for me because, again, when I lived in Russia, the way Russian historical professionals organized, really, they didn't teach very much of women's history. And this is one of the branches of history that is taught in the United States. So I think it's very important. It really shows us where women fit into society and how they contributed to history and culture of different countries.
Okay.
All right. Besides just teaching here at college, I understand you're involved in some things in the community sometimes?
Oh yes, definitely. Since I came here, I had chances to talk to representatives of the community about Russian history and Russian culture. And this past summer I had a wonderful opportunity, and I, together with Dr. Sigsby, who still teaches at SAU, and he's been here for forever, I think. I hope he forgives me for saying this. Well, anyway, we took a group of tourists from one of the churches in Magnolia to Russia. On a wonderful cruise from Moscow to St. Petersburg. It's a river cruise, and the boat stops in a number of Russian towns. And we accompanied the group. I was a translator, sort of, I guess, a cultural assistant.
So you got to translate and
What places did you all visit when y'all went on the trip?
The first place was Moscow. That was the first stop, where the group flew into Moscow. They spent 3 days in Moscow and took a tour of the city. We had wonderful English-speaking tour guides. I was actually wondering, why did they invite me to be a translator? You know, they already have one. Anyway, after Moscow, then we got on the boat. And the boat made stops in several smaller towns that have very interesting cultural tradition. And then the last stop was St. Petersburg.
While you were in Russia, did you get an opportunity to meet anybody you hadn't seen in a while? Or?
Oh yeah, of course, all of my friends. That is always wonderful.
So you did get a good opportunity there.
Okay. Can you tell me more about the Russian exchange program?
Oh, certainly. It was established about 10 years ago. So there has been a very long tradition. Dr. Sixby was in charge of it as the program started. Dr. Watt took over from Dr. Sixby, so he ran the program for quite a while. And now I'm trying to fill in the shoes, which is a challenging again, opportunity, but it's very interesting. The way the program works, each year, one professor from Moscow Pedagogical University comes over to SAU and teaches a Russian language course. Actually, there are 2 levels, the beginning and the intermediate Russian. Each semester, 2 students from Moscow State Pedagogical University come over here, and they are linguistic students. So they mostly take English classes, but they also take history classes. And sometimes SAU professors go to Moscow. It's an opportunity that's open, and we're hoping to send somebody this year. And since I'm on air, I will use this opportunity to mention to everyone that we're hoping to send a student from SAU to Moscow Pedagogical University. So yes, check out advertisements. There's $750 that are available for somebody who would do a research project, and then we can send this person to Moscow. Lodging will be free. They will provide you with tour guides, and you don't need to know any Russian.
That's great.
Yes, that's the best part of it.
I might want
I
to
sure
do
don't
that.
know any Russian.
Yes, you don't.
Do you know of any SAU students who have had any of these opportunities in the past or taken them?
There have been groups, yes. Dr. Sixby actually in the spring, he took groups of SAU students over to Moscow several times. The only catch is here that you have to get your own money for the airplane ticket, but otherwise they provide the dormitory.
I'm sorry. When is the next time you think you might be going to Russia, taking a group of people to Russia again?
We'll probably advertise this spring.
Because I would like to go.
Yeah. Yes, well, it's great for me too, you know, to show people the country where I used to live. And
it's interesting to see other parts of the world.
Okay. Is there anything that you're doing now, such as a research project or anything? Can you explain that?
Yes, since I took that trip to Russia this summer, I started a wonderful research project. At least it's wonderful for me. I think it's just extremely intriguing. A couple of years ago, there was a movie, Pearl Harbor, right? Everybody watched that. Ben Affleck, Josh Hartnett, right? But the one part of the movie that caught my eye, and I thought, that would be interesting to research, was the Doolittle raid. And the story is that after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the Americans sent a group of planes to Tokyo, to bomb Tokyo. Well, of course, in those days, planes were not quite as advanced as today, right? So they needed, so they needed to land someplace, and they were planning to land in China. But one of the planes actually ran out of fuel. So these guys knew that they either would die over the ocean, or they had a different plan to land in Russia. So that one plane landed in Russia. And the research I'm doing right now is about the crew of that plane that stayed in Russia for over a year. They wrote memoirs. They submitted reports to the American intelligence after they came back to the United States. And it's just fascinating to me. The wartime Russia through the eyes of the American pilots. This is just a great story.
And we were allies with Russia at that time. Some people might not know
Right.
on the history.
Yes. It was somewhat a problematic landing because, as you mentioned, Russians and Americans at the time were allies. But Russia had a neutrality treaty with Japan. So when that American crew participated in the bombing of Tokyo, Russians were afraid to admit that that crew was over there because the Japanese would get angry. So that's the reason why the crew stayed there for a year, because they were interned. They couldn't make them prisoners of war because they were allies. So they were interned, they were put in a very nice house, but they were essentially under house arrest. That's what happened to those.
And many people probably don't know about all that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. Again, it's one of those things I think once you hear it, you really get kind of engrossed in it.
People only see bits and parts of things like that in the movies. They don't get the full story behind it.
Right.
Why else might history be more important to us? We've all got the stereotypical answers so we don't make the same mistakes
Like being
in the
a
past.
history teacher.
Right.
I mean, why do you think that students should take history? Do you really just think they should
Okay,
have
well,
to take
I'll
it?
hate to give you a stereotypical answer, but
That's
I
fine.
think, when you know your past, you are more informed in your present and in your
That's
future.
exactly what I
But I
said.
think it's great to major in history because it opens up many avenues for success in the future. For example, I don't know how many people realize that, but if you want to be a lawyer, for example, getting a bachelor's degree in history is a great thing to do because you get those skills that are necessary for becoming a lawyer. For example, you learn how to write very well, you learn how to make a persuasive argument, and all of this comes in very handy in law school. So being a history major is a good thing.
And all students do have to learn a lot of court cases and stuff.
Right?
Where else have you traveled other than Russia and the United States?
Well, since I teach European and world history, of course I was so interested. When you read all of those books, you say, I would really like to see this place that I'm talking about. So I went to France, I went to Italy, I went to England. And it was just fascinating. It's one thing to talk about gladiators in the Colosseum and say, well, have you seen the movie with Russell Crowe? But it's a whole different issue when you actually go to the Colosseum, stand there and try to imagine what it was like all of those centuries ago to be in the Colosseum, to watch the gladiators or to be one of the gladiators.
Yeah, knowing history makes you appreciate what you see when you go see it. Is there anything in particular that stood out to you when you went on those trips to like France and Italy and all those places?
Well, as I say, I mentioned Colosseum. There were just so many things. Or when I went to Florence, we'll talk about this later in our class, the Renaissance art. And I used to teach some art history classes too. So again, you talk about this painting and say, well, or the Sistine Chapel. You say, that's what it looks like. Let's look at the ceiling. There is this particular painting. There is this one. But when you see the whole thing, you say, wow, even to see the size of it in real life, is it big, is it small? That's fascinating.
Yes, just seeing things through tiny pictures can only give you so much of an interpretation of what's there.
Right. There is this movie, Good Will Hunting. And Robin Williams' character, I just love that episode where he gets very upset with Matt Damon's character, right? And then he comes back and says, well, I shouldn't get upset with you. You're just a boy. You can talk about the Sistine Chapel, but you don't know what it smells like when you're out there. So I was very curious, and I found out it doesn't smell like anything. So, those little things that are very interesting when you travel.
And they keep it clean, huh?
Right.
Oh, goodness.
You get to see more than just the few more famous pictures. You get to see all the ones there, right? I understand you enjoyed going to the museums and stuff while you were there.
Oh, yes.
So you got to see all the artifacts and stuff that you've been teaching about. And
Well, not nearly as many as I would have wanted to see. I think I need to take many more trips, and hopefully some trips will be with students. That would be good.
that would be good.
Okay. Can you tell me about Russian culture?
Oh, there's so much to tell.
Just the basics. What some people would like to know. I know I would like to know about is it like how like maybe a culture like for instance the Native Americans, they do dances and all this type of stuff. Is there anything particular that Russians may do like on different given days, like maybe a holiday or something?
Festivals.
Festivals.
Oh, certainly. Certainly. Well, that's a big question. if you just want a general outline of what Russian culture is like and what Russian people are like, I think one thing when you come to Russia from America, is you enter the airport, right? People speak different language, and you just immediately see that just the way they communicate is different. So I think expect Russians to be more emotional. They'll hug you, all the time. They might even kiss you. That's just normal. They're not very reserved. Well, as far as holidays, we have a number of nice holidays. I think one thing Russians like to do for holidays is to give each other lots of flowers. I think it's a nice tradition, yeah. So there's lots of street vendors everywhere who sell flowers. And, even if you go visit a friend, you'll just on the way to the friend's house,
flowers.
Yeah, you buy some flowers, you bring it over, and it's really nice, I think.
Let's see, are there any other holidays? Or
Yeah, any holidays different from American holidays?
We have Christmas.
Yeah, we have Christmas,
New
Valentine's
Year's,
Day,
everybody
and all that.
has those. But
I think the main difference, we also have New Year and Christmas, but the New Year holiday is more celebrated than Christmas. People celebrate Christmas,
really?
but
More than New Year.
it's kind of a small family thing. New Year is huge. It's like it's the favorite holiday of the year. People stay up, all night, and they party, and they have lots of food, and it's a big production for each family. It's really something you look forward to. And
do they
there's all
shoot
kinds
fireworks? Do they shoot fireworks?
Yeah, fireworks. There are wonderful TV shows. Like New Year is one of the best days to watch television. That's just
Really?
all the shows that you want to see, all the pop stars, best actors, and you just click different channels, and they will have something great for you.
Okay. Are there any other holidays that you would like to talk about?
Well, one holiday, which I find it very interesting, that Russian immigrants who come over to the United States still celebrate it. Like here you would have Valentine's Day, right? You have Mother's Day, you have Father's Day. Well, in Russia they don't have those holidays. They just have, it used to be, in the Soviet days, it used to be called the Red Army Day. And the other one, the 8th of March, the International Women's Day. But despite the fact that they were termed in those, ideological words, that sounded just horrible and scary, but in reality, the 8th of March was a Women's Day, and that's when all the guys, it's like Valentine's Day and Mother's Day is combined, So it was very nice. Again, lots of flowers and everything. And for the guys, the Red Army Day was just a holiday for the guys, when you do something for the men in your life, something nice. So as I said, when Russian immigrants come over to the United States, they celebrate Mother's Day, they celebrate, Valentine's Day, but they never forget the 8th of March.
They just celebrate all the holidays.
Yes, I'm sorry, yeah. They celebrate all of these holidays.
Okay. Can you tell me about the Russian food?
Okay, lots of potatoes in different incarnations, lots of cabbages in different incarnations, beets. Let's see what else. Sour cream.
Sour cream.
Yes. Russian food is not light. Basically, don't expect it to be very light. Lots of soups. And this is a tradition that you eat soup every day. It's just, you don't question that. For lunch, you always have soup. So again, when Russians come to the United States, what do you mean, a sandwich for lunch? That's horrible. You have to have soup. Where is my soup?
They have a lot of the same food, but just some different traditions, such as soup and so forth. That's interesting. It's not so different like Chinese food or anything, is it?
No, not quite so different.
Is there any specialty food that they wouldn't have in America they would usually make in Russia? Something that you probably would miss?
I wouldn't say that you don't have it in America. There are so many different immigrant cultures in America that people would have something similar.
People are not really used to around here.
Yeah, well, something that we call piroshkis. It's like, I guess, pastries. They could have either meat inside or again cabbage and egg. So there are different fillings, but it's basically like pastry. We have something that's very similar to ravioli. So this would be very traditional dishes. Sometimes I make them for table talk that we hold in our department on Fridays.
I bet the other teachers appreciate that.
Well, I hope so.
Maybe not. Huh?
Yeah, I don't know.
Let's see. About the classes you teach women's history, European history, Russian history, and what else?
World.
World history. Okay, what does that class involve?
Well, there are two sections of world civilizations. The first one starts at the very beginning of human civilization and goes to 1700. And the second class, World Civ 2, as we call it, is from 1700 to the present. So basically, it's talking at different world cultures in the past and their connection to the present. That's at least how I try to teach this class, because it's like, well, what's the point to talk about ancient Egyptians if we don't see how their society contributed to what we have today?
Yeah.
I know I really enjoy your class so far. I haven't been in there that long, but I really enjoyed. As far as teaching the class, I like your style. What brought you to have the style of teaching that you have? Like, you know, like you're more involved with it. You show us slides and movies. So what made you want to do that?
Well, you know, it was an interesting, talking about my teaching style, it was an interesting evolution. Because I think when you come from Russia, it's a different academic tradition. Russian professors are supposed to be kind of very serious. You know, they come in front of the podium, they take out their notes, and they would stand there and read their notes, and they will give you really stern looks. And that's how the Russian academics works, you know. So when I came to the United States, first as a graduate student, I said, teachers here are so different. I like this style, you know, it's more informal. Student gets more involved, and hopefully students don't fear the teacher, you know. So I thought, I'd like to try. And then also I started working on the side, besides my teaching, I started working at the Historical Society, at the Minnesota Historical Society. And I was a tour guide. And when you have this tour guiding experience, you know, people show up, you tell them about history. They don't have to like you. You don't assign them any grades. They see you for 45 minutes of your tour. So you have to draw them into your story, you know. You have to make them involved for those 45 minutes. And I think that experience really made me look at teaching very differently. How do I get students involved? I try. Hopefully, to some extent, I succeed.
I like the fact that you don't make us remember a lot of dates.
Well, the important thing is to remember connections. What came first? What came, you know, next?
So how all the societies affected us and so forth is what you try to focus on, and not so much boring students to death with little details.
Well, sometimes you have to throw in a good story. You know, you have to make it memorable. Otherwise, people will fall asleep.
A lot of people think history class is nothing but boring, but
I know. Most people will show up and say, oh, she's going to make us learn this whole long list of dates. And it's going to be meaningless and pointless, and I'm going to fall asleep. So I try to do everything to make sure they don't fall asleep.
Okay. Of course I know, but explain to us the games that you might play in your class.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. I think it's good. Again, it gets everybody a chance to meet other people in class and sort of do group work. One of the things that we studied was the origins of law and legal systems. So we studied the Hammurabi Code of Law from the ancient times, from ancient Mesopotamia. And what we did, we divided our class into several groups. Each group chose a certain law that they liked, and then they presented a court case in front of everybody else, and I thought, you did a great job, guys. They were very creative. I was sitting there giggling, I think, for the rest of the day after we had that class session.
Because I like how they use the Code of Hammurabi to present day. They kind of combined it to make us understand it more. I really do like that. Anything else?
well, we're just about out of time, but let's see, you've been here at SAU for 2 years, I
This is my
understand.
second year.
And where did you teach before you came here?
I taught at the University of St. Francis in St. Paul, Minnesota. It's a branch campus of that university.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you plan on being at SAU for a while?
I hope so. I sure hope so.
So you think you're going to be, in Magnolia for a while? So this is like where you want to be as far as right now.
Yes, certainly.
You don't have any plans of going anywhere else, leaving us?
Not that I know of. Maybe you know something that I don't, but certainly I plan to be here.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap this up. This has been the SAU Report. I'm Marquita Newton.
And I'm Bryan Jones.